All right, here we are with Ryan Steuer, the founder of Magnify Learning, a project-based learning professional development organization. Prior to founding Magnify Learning, Ryan was an engineer for a Fortune 50 company, an eighth grade English teacher, and a missionary. He shares his educational leadership insights on YouTube and on the PBL Simplified podcast. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Danny, super excited to be here with you and your ruckus makers.
Awesome. You have such an interesting story, and I didn't even know. I don't know if I remember or forgot the engineer piece. I might have questions about that later.
Yeah.
But you sold your house. Let's start here. You sold your house. You now live with your family full time in an RV, and that's certainly making a ruckus, right? I'm sure your family had questions and stories and whatever. But what was the catalyst for that decision?
Yeah. So we tested it out first, right? So we did a sabbatical. We did
Okay.
a short sabbatical of 2 weeks. Then we did a full sabbatical of a month. And then it was like the wheels didn't come off of the family or any of the work that we were doing. So we sold the house. And if you remember, as there was the bubble where all of our houses were worth 1.5 times what we bought them for. It's like that only
Yeah.
works out if we don't buy another house in the same market, right? So we said, well, let's sell our house, buy an RV, which is where I'm at right now, and then just travel the country. And the podcast still works, YouTube still works. I go and visit schools around the country for the work that we're doing with Magnify Learning with schools. And in between, we visit all these really cool places. So we're birders. So just this morning, we're in southern Texas, which is a big migration route for birds. So we got to see some birds you
Okay.
can never see in Indiana, where we're originally from. So we
Huh.
added a lot of birds to our life birding lists today.
Got you. So you have a list and you're tracking the birds you see and where you saw them and that kind of thing?
Yep, absolutely. So we saw an American oyster catcher today that we had never seen before. So it was on the coast. And I kind of joke, I don't think it's very hard to catch an oyster, but that is the bird's name. So,
Yeah.
we just keep adding them to the list, and it's really a pretty neat way to see the country. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's authentic learning right there, right? So, uh, have you seen a bald eagle? I have to ask.
yeah, we've seen bald eagles all over the place, whether it's over a lake in South Dakota or out in Acadia in Maine. We've seen them down in Florida. We've seen them about everywhere, which is really neat. They're just a bald eagle. You can see it. And once you kind of get its outline, there's a majestic piece to it that still makes you stop and look. I love them.
Yeah, I haven't seen one yet, so that's like a bucket
Oh,
list item, I guess. And you brought up
yeah.
South Dakota, so just a shout out. I talked to Lisa Perry in South Dakota yesterday. So just hey, Lisa, if you're listening, you're super cool. Let me ask you one more question in terms of RV type life. What kind of adventures are you getting into? So you're doing the birding and that kind of thing, but what else? What kind of ruckus are you making traveling
Yeah,
around with the family?
for sure. So we've been out to Yellowstone and the Tetons to just go and see. So we've
Yeah.
seen bear, moose, elk, a little bit of everything. So like you said, it's just this authentic learning opportunity for the kids. We've got 5 kids that are in this RV with us and a happy wife. And, we
Yeah.
go around and we just learn from different cities. Sometimes we're in a rural setting, sometimes it's urban. We've got a couple canoes with us that we, jump into at times as well. So
Okay.
there's a fair amount of ruckus making happening pretty much everywhere we go whenever we show up.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Uh, and do you take guests? Like if I just show up and knock on the RV, do I get to hang out with the Sawyer family or?
Yeah, for sure you do, So it has been a really neat place to, I'm in a mastermind and,
Yeah.
and our mastermind friends are all over the country, So if I'm in New York, I stop and see Michael. And if I'm in Chicago, I stop and see
Sure.
Marianne and see Dana, and I'm in Florida. So it really is an opportunity to see family and see friends in different ways that you probably wouldn't otherwise. So, and yeah, for
Right.
sure, you're always welcome.
Yeah. Cool. Talk about your mastermind experience just for a second. I'm sure people that, if you're not new to this show, you know that we serve school leaders through masterminds. But
Yeah,
yeah, folks aren't, really familiar with the structure and that kind of thing. Maybe a
yeah.
brief overview, but like, why is it something that you invest in, and why do you continue to show up, and the value? Like, how have you grown in it, type of thing?
I can't imagine that I would ever not invest in mastermind at this point. Like I've got
Hmm.
20, 25 people that are leaders, um, that are operating a very high level. So if I've got
Hmm.
an issue or a concern or a thought, or really the part of a mastermind that's hard to get the ROI around is just the aura of high flyers. Like we meet
Yep.
weekly, we meet in person, which is really, really important. Like go to the in-person event, right? And
Yeah.
you get to just be and know that there are high flyers out there just like you, right? The ones that, get up and exercise and journal and take cold showers and read like crazy, and right, like do all the things that high flyers do. Um, and you can have conversations that you can't have with everybody, right? Like your ruckus
Hmm.
makers, you can't always talk to the principal at the school district next to you, or even other
Yeah.
principals in your district. If you're really a ruckus maker, it's like not everybody gets that idea and mindset. So a
Right.
mastermind, you're bringing together people that have a similar mindset of making things happen, again, operating at a high level. And there's just an aura in that it's changed my life. Like there's like literally, even with just in 2 years, it's completely changed all the work that I do,
Hmm.
and the way that I think about the world. So I couldn't
Yeah.
recommend
Well.
it enough. Especially, I know that, again, if you're listening, if you're a ruckus, or maybe if you're on the fence with the masterminds with Better Leaders, Better
Yeah.
Schools, like jump off the
Yeah.
fence into them. Like if you think
Yeah.
about if you could meet with high flying, the top tier principals and just glean from them, what would that be worth to you? Like it's well worth the investment, 100, 200 times worth the investment. I couldn't be more
Yeah.
for masterminds.
All right, cool. Thank you for that endorsement. I'll never forget when Lizzie, I affectionately call her Spike. So, Spike, if you're listening, what's going on? And when she joined, she's like, finally, people get it, right? Like everywhere
Yeah.
else, you express the idea, you want to evolve, innovate within education. Maybe it's your district, your supervisor. Uh, Maybe you guys got an echo chamber type of thing, or a
Hmm.
fishbowl going on, and it's like, no, we can never do that, right? Never. Are you an alien? Like, what do you mean? Like, do that in education? And then she gets in the
Yeah.
mastermind. She said, like, oh yeah, we've done that before. Here's some things you should try, right? Or that's a great
Yeah.
idea. How can I support you? So cool. I don't want
I'll
to
give
make
you
this about me. Okay,
Can I give
go
you
ahead.
one more though? Because I
Yes,
got
yes.
the chance to be an opportunity seat for a new venture that I'm looking at in supporting
Okay.
missionaries in their work. And
Yeah, yeah.
being in the mastermind, like they just expanded my idea. Like there aren't too many rooms where I have to look for the break, right? Like normally I'm pushing the work and pushing the work and pushing the work. It
Yeah.
was like suddenly it was like, whoa, where's the break on this, right? Because they had me
Yeah.
moving to such a high level. It was exciting for me, right? Because
Yeah.
again, just like Spike, I forgot her real name. Sorry, I probably don't get to call you
No,
Spike, but
don't
he's
worry. Spike's the name that matters. So
all right. Yeah. So the same thing with Spike. It's like you get somebody that knows the work enough to like slam your foot down on the pedal to really move your work farther. It's exciting. It is.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool. All right. Back to you. I don't want to make this about
Yeah.
me. So, you're in the RV, you're doing the birding, you're having these adventures, Yellowstone, the Tetons, that kind of stuff. But talk to us about what like authentic learning looks like for your kids. They're obviously having this really, generous and rich experience. And so,
Yeah.
what does learning look like for them?
So it looks like a lot of the way I do life as well, right? Kind of pass that down to my
Okay.
kids. So I actually
Yeah.
just switched podcast editing companies, and I was really happy
Okay.
with my last one. But now my kids edit, produce, and post my podcast, right? So I saved money on that, but I'm also paying them pretty well, right, to do that work.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
that's their public work. Like they're building that portfolio. My daughter has her own podcast, like she's created, and I think her podcast is better than mine. Like she's so natural at it, right? And
What's the
and she's
topic?
12.
Okay.
So it's called The Amazing Coco Land. So we bought the URL for her,
Yeah.
theamazingcocoland.com, and she's got this whole world. There's a map and her stuffed animals kind of interact with this.
Right.
And she's got different voices that come in. She brings in my younger kids as a different voice in the land as well. And they just go through, it's hilarious. It's legitimately funny. And,
Yeah.
you know, she sees that turning into a business at some point. She doesn't know yet, right? But she's going to get a following. I've got a son he's a birder. So he's got nature photography on Shutterstock, and he gets downloads.
Yeah.
So he gets paid for that. He's got a Printify shop that you can buy his artwork from. So
Mm.
all within that, like, are they learning math? Like 100% they're learning math. Like they know percentages really well, right? Like, you know,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're working with them every single day, and you know they're writing scripts, they're writing copy, they're doing all these pieces as they're creating real world authentic work that goes out into the world, and people see it. Their YouTube channel's growing, right? I think more than mine. So again, there's like some pieces. It's like I'm gonna have to circle back and learn from them, I think. But that's what it looks
Oh,
like for us, and it's great.
that's super cool. And you know, they're managing their time. I read all the time
Yeah.
on different like principal groups and this kind. Do you still use planners? You know, like do they work in paper? Do you have to do them electronically? Hall passes. But you know, at the end of the day, we're talking about executive functioning skills and that kind of stuff. And my
Mhm.
buddy Mitch over at Organized Binders, like great at that. But like your kids, that they're figuring it out, have a lot of autonomy and agency. And if they don't show up, well, the podcast doesn't go out. They're going to lose listeners, all this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
they're in it right now as young people, which is super cool. And you said the amazing Coco Land, like, watch out, Disney, like
That's right.
it's coming for you, right? So cool. Help us bridge it though, from your setting where the sky is truly the limit.
Hmm.
I think we could argue that the sky's the limit in a school setting as well. But, folks that I call play it safe principles, that's the opposite of a ruckus maker,
Got
uh,
it.
they might have trouble. They might put a ceiling right here, we can't do those things. So, bridge the gap. Like how can schools create some of these like really authentic experiences for their students?
Yeah, it's a similar process. It's like, where are the passions and gifts in your kids, right, in learners, and then what's the need in the real world, and what's the
Mm,
audience that they could reach out to, and authentically serve, right? Because that's what it's like when we get out into the real world, if you will. Like we should be serving someone well, providing value, and that's how we're compensated. So what's that look like in a classroom setting? It's a similar idea. So if you look at, let's say, 8th grade science standards, you have to cover the Punnett square. And you can do that through a textbook, and you can look at vocabulary and test on those things. Or you could say, like, where is the Punnett square really used in the real world? It's like, well, doctors that are
can't
studying
help you
genetic
with that.
diseases. Yeah, right. But science teachers can, right? So it's like,
Okay.
we can't connect those dots sometimes. I'm like, well, this is great, science teacher in 8th grade, because you're the perfect person to connect these dots. Most of us can't do it. I have no idea why the Punnett square is important, right? And it's not
Mm,
inherently important to teenagers. So the teacher in the classroom becomes really important, and to give that teacher the autonomy to do this, it's like, where is this used? Well, it's used in doctors' offices. Well, what if 8th
mm,
graders created a pamphlet that talked about this genetic disease? So then when a parent finds out that their kid has a genetic disease, they want to know two things. One, is my child going to be okay? Two, they suddenly want to know everything there is to know about that genetic disease. Well, why can't your 8th graders create that? Right? It's
mm, mm.
known facts and research, right? That those things are known. Why can't they package that to a PSA or a podcast or a website or a pamphlet that the audience can consume and benefit from?
Yeah. Good questions. And, it's probably the type of thinking and the questions you are using and leveraging when years ago you helped start one of the first PBL middle schools in Indianapolis. Can you tell us the story of launching that school?
Yeah, that's the big aha for us, I think, was is we did just that. We took all the standards from language arts, math, science, and social studies, and just said, what are our big themes, and where do they connect with the real world? Where can we serve people at? And PBL units just pop off the page with a dry erase board,
Mm,
wherever it is that you're popping them. So it's like suddenly our learners, we can take the age-old question, why are we learning this? And we put it right up front and say, this is exactly why you're learning this, because we need to help
mm.
these people. Their kid has a genetic disease. We're going to help them. Well, kids wake up to that. Like, I'll do that. Like, that's real work. And to do that, they're
Yep.
going to have to hit all of these different standards. So we
Hmm.
set up structures like that. And then we had 25% of the kids in a large comprehensive middle school. We had 8% of the discipline. The attendance rate was 1.5% higher. And in a failing school, we would have been a B on standardized tests. So it was like kids generally showed up to school and did what they were supposed to do and then engaged in the work. They were still kids, right? So there was still 8% of discipline. It's not like discipline disappeared completely,
Right.
but creating a bridge from the standards to relevance and authenticity, it did get kids to put their head up and really engage in the work.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's who wouldn't want more engagement, right, on any campus? And so maybe
Yeah.
PBL and working with Ryan at Magnify Learning is like something to really, really explore. So awesome. I love how you put that why in the front of it too, because it helps. I mean, that's what Simon Sinek says, right? He kind of got famous, start with the why. And
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing, your approach at the school you launched did the same type of thing. I'm enjoying this conversation. We're gonna get a message in from some sponsors, and when we come back, I want to hear about some of the best projects students completed, maybe a story of failing at PBL and what you learned, and of course, you got a great new book out called PBL Simplified, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that too. So learn how to successfully navigate change, shape your school's success, and empower your teams with Harvard's certificate in school management and leadership. Get online PD that fits your schedule. Courses include leading change, leading school strategy and innovation, leading people, and leading learning. You could apply today at betterschools.com/Harvard. Now, I'll tell you that teachers use TeachFX to record a lesson and they automatically get personalized insights into their classroom conversation patterns and teaching practices. You can see TeachFX for yourself and learn about their special partnership options for ruckus makers just like you by going to teachfx.com/BLBS. And today's show is also sponsored by Organized Binder, a program that gives students daily exposure to goal setting, reflective learning, time and task management, study strategies, organizational skills, and more. Organized Binder has a color-coded system that's implemented by the teacher through parallel process with students, helping them create a predictable and also dependable classroom routine. Learn more and improve your students' executive functioning at organizedbinder.com. We're back with Ryan Steuer, the founder of Magnify Learning and the author of PBL Simplified, which you should pick up. So tell me, like, maybe your favorite project you've ever seen, or just one of the best projects you've seen in PBL.
Sure. So there's a lot of them because it really works like K-12, right? Like we've used PBL implementation and into higher ed. But one of my favorites that came out recently from a school in Kentucky, an elementary school, they had kindergartners and first graders. And they said, well, we're going to go to, a senior citizen home. So we're going to go visit other people's grandma and grandpas, right? And they couldn't do it because of COVID. And then I guess kindergartners, first graders, they said, well, how are they communicating with their family? I don't know. It's a real problem. So they're like, well, we should get them iPads so that they can communicate, like via FaceTime, right? Like, that would be great. Well, that makes sense. How are we going to pay for those? And the teachers are just kind of guiding them through this conversation. And eventually they decide they're going to write a book. So they do that, write a book about their town. They illustrate it, and they have a publisher publish it. So you can go and buy their book right now. And I had the kids on the podcast, right? Which is awesome. And they just start out with, I'm in kindergarten and I'm an author and I also like to play soccer. Right? It's like,
what?
Right. It's like, what a great identity piece, right? Like identifying as an author, in kindergarten, first grade. And then the next learner was like, yep, I'm an illustrator, and I really like to run, so it's like all the same normal elementary stuff, but I also snuck an illustrator and author. It's like I still have a hard time identifying with author, right? And so like my second book, and like they're going to start out at like 6 years old, like, yeah, I can be an author, no problem.
Yeah.
So
why not me?
Yeah, exactly. Why not me, right? So it's like, one, the empathy to say, hey, here are these other people that are suffering in some way. How can we help them? but the identity that the learners get to take with them outside of this project and the tangible thing that they created, it was about their town. So they actually sold quite a few right within their town. So they had sales too, right off the bat. So they learned this whole process. But again, for me, the exciting part of that PBL unit is really the identity that the learners leave with because of the authenticity of the work they're doing.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's cool. I mean, it was a project that really succeeded and that kind of thing. And I'm sure there were mishaps and failures along the way, but I think failure is a great, teacher. So can you tell us a story of just blowing it, really, really failing at PBL and what you learned?
Yeah, so I've got these in the book in PBL Simplified. We go through wins, fails, and where to start. And I usually take the fails on myself, right? So I celebrate the wins of schools across the country that we've been working with, and I take the fails. So one of my big fails early on was I was just excited. I'm like, I'm going to use this classroom. We're going to change the world. So it was like, all right, I see 125 eighth graders every day. If they all change some small part of the world, we've made a dent in the universe, right? Steve Jobs.
That's
So
right.
everybody creates their own service learning project, their own PBL unit, if you will. And all of my learners in the Midwest were pretty sure that everybody that needed food was in Africa. So everybody was going to collect food, canned food, and we were going to ship it to Africa. And I was excited. So I was like, let's do this, right? Like, let's everybody do it. And you'd think that with my background, so I worked at UPS as an engineer, you'd think I'd understand the shipping costs of canned goods to Africa. Not to mention the fact that I feel like the address in the box was just going to say Africa. Like we didn't do the work to like work with a missionary or work with somebody on the ground. So there were 125 different ideas of, again, most of them canned food because I didn't really let them explore enough, or I didn't give them enough rails to work within. So they just went to what they know, and I didn't introduce them to enough ideas. So 125 different ideas. We couldn't pay for it. So then it's like, well, we should have a car wash. Well, how are we going to buy those supplies? Well, we'll sell lollipops at lunch. Well, okay. So now we're doing lollipops so that we could do a car wash so that we could pay for postage. And then finally, one kid comes in. So that's the epic failure in case it didn't fully come through. But here's the cherry on top is Billy finally says, my mom volunteers at the local food pantry. She'd probably let us go there for free.
Right.
Like
In our
what?
backyard. Yeah.
Yeah, like why didn't I have you in on my planning? Which, by the way, is an aha that you should write down. Like, why didn't I have the kids in on my planning? Because it seems so obvious now, right? Like, think globally, work locally. But that one definitely blew up. We never finished it. I just told the kids, like, hey, this didn't work at all. You still have to write compound, complex sentences. Like, those are the standards we're working on. But the service learning project, we're going to have to shelf or adjust.
Yeah. Wow. And I hope that they had some powerful insights from that. But it sounds one of them being like, hey, there's a food pantry right here where we can serve. Is really really important. So let's talk PBL Simplified. You do have that new book that's available, and I believe you share a 6-step process in the book to PBL. So can you give us a brief overview of that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole idea of PBL simplified is right, it's not PBL watered down, right? So it's still authentic, it's still rigorous, but we really want to reach the majority of schools. So 51 by 2051. I want to reach the majority of schools by 2051. It doesn't have to just be me. We need to make that shift from passive to empowered. So to do that, we're past the innovators, right? And your ruckus makers know this. Like if they look at their staff, you've got innovators, you've got early adopters, early majority, late majority, and some laggards, like somewhere in the innovation curve, right? Simon Sinek gives another good talk on that, right? Yeah. So PBL Simplified is really for, those teachers, like there's a structure for PBL now, right? We're not just making it up as we go along. We don't use any of that language of mess in the middle at this point, right? Like there's 6 steps. So you're going to define the problem. You're going to create success criteria. So what's it look like when that problem's solved? And then you're going to research possible solutions. What are all the different ideas we have? We'll pick one of those solutions in step 4. In step 5, we're going to test it. We're going to run it, rerun it, and present. And in step 6, we're going to reflect. And we're going to run those general 6 steps for every PBL unit we do. It's going to be standards based. It's going to be authentic. There's going to be a presentation, right? So there's a structure to these things. So your teachers in the classroom are not just making this up as they go along, because that just freaks some of us out. And some of your innovators are like, sure, I'll run with it. But if you're going to get the majority of your staff on board, there needs to be a structure and a process. And that's what the book's really about. There's 2 chapters specifically that I think your ruckus makers, your leaders would really appreciate. And it's school implementation of PBL, and then also leadership specifically around PBL.
Oh,
like, how do you bring this in, right? Do you just, because you don't want to come in and say, hey, guess what? January 1, we're all doing PBL. Go, right? It's like, so how do you create a leadership team? How do you get a buzz? How do you create a grassroots movement? And I go through a couple different examples there.
Yeah. It's a pet peeve. And so I'm just going to say it on the podcast because I'm in a bunch of big principal groups, right, online. And I love when people are like, they're asking for help. They need help, right? And then they're like, go. And I don't know why I resist that. Whenever somebody puts that in a post, I'm just like, I don't want to help you. I don't know. Maybe that says something about me, but it's just like, I don't know. It really annoys me. So I'm just being real in this moment. Okay, cool. So PBL Simplified out, at least at the time of us doing this, I think it's for pre-order. By the time the podcast comes out, it actually will be available. And so just really, encourage ruckus makers to check it out. I love that there is a specific chapter around leadership and thinking through implementation is what I'm hearing. And maybe the last thing we'll say, in regards to this book, it's great you get this proven process, 6 steps, and it's a framework, right? Constraints there and a lot of creativity within those constraints, but you can use it over and over again. But just in terms of implementation, how does a learning team help with full school implementation of PBL?
Yeah, that's probably my favorite implementation plan at this point, and that's what we work with districts with. At this is now, like some schools will create a PBL school, which is great. You can create your own culture, but then sometimes PBL gets stuck in that school and not the rest of the district, right? So a PBL leadership or implementation team, they go out and they explore. They say, hey, we're going to learn about project-based learning, and they go learn about it. They get trained. They come back and they do it with their kids. So it's teachers in the classroom, as well as administrators, but now they're doing it with their kids and they're trying it out, and it's very successful. It's how teachers have always wanted to teach, right? You want to open up new opportunities for your kids. You want to have a why behind the learning. So when the implementation team goes through, the messaging is always, hey, we're going to see if this works for our school. Does this work at Southport Elementary or not? Let's go find out. And then the whole staff gets to see, wow, this is really working. And what we see with this plan is then the implementation team goes and the rest of the teachers say, well, when do I get trained? When do my kids get to do that really cool stuff? Oh, well, how about next summer? Right? But you see the shift. Now teachers are wanting to get trained. It's not I'm making the next group go. They want to get trained. So that's your early majority, right? Is now saying, yeah, I want to try this out because they've seen it work with, students in their actual school, not just a school where it's like, yeah, I know it works over there, but what about us, right? They see that Ryan, who's a struggling student and typically doesn't do any work, is engaged in this work. And you start to get your own stories from the school that you're within, and you start to build a grassroots movement, which is really exciting as a leader, because now you're really doing the visionary work that you really want to do. You're not just managing people, you're doing the visionary work, you're putting the flag out there, and you're helping empower people to go out and do it.
Brilliant. Cool. So check it out, Ruckus Makers, PBL Simplified. So Ryan, if you could put a message on all school marquees around the world for a single day, what would your message read?
It would be life is choices. This is what my mom would sign every letter to me in college. At the end, it said, life is choices, Mom.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
So I brought it to my 8th grade classroom, an urban school in Indianapolis. And every day when kids left my classroom, it was life is choices, life is choices, life is choices. And every now and then I'd put it out on the board and say, here are the choices you could make. If you decide to not smoke for the next 6 years, you can actually go to Hawaii, right? So I just kind of put some of those things out there. And I'll still have kids that hit me up on Facebook, or I saw a kid at the grocery store. He's not a kid anymore, but he's like, oh yeah, you're the life is choices guy, right? Yep, I'm a life is choices guy. So it would
Yeah,
definitely be
yeah.
that.
I think I used to end the podcast ages ago. I've had this show for 7 years, haven't missed a Wednesday, 7 years. It's kind of nuts.
Love
But
it.
I think the quote, I don't remember, so sorry for the attribution, but I'm pretty sure the quote was basically like, life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of like how you choose to respond to it. So
Yeah.
thanks, mom. Life is choices.
Yeah. That's
Listen
right.
to your mom. Listen to your
Yep,
mom.
that's right.
So, Ryan, you've built a school, but I'm going to ask you this question already. Again, if you were building another school, and maybe this time it's your dream school, you had no
Mhm.
constraints in terms of resources, your only limitation was your imagination. How would you build your dream school? What would be the 3 guiding principles?
This is a great question for leaders to wrestle with and actually write down, I think. I think I would connect the school to a large corporation of some kind, like a UPS,
Hmm,
for instance. So you can go out and see the
okay.
professionalism right there, right? You could pull them in, you could go sit in some meetings. So that'd be the first thing I would do. And so maybe that's one of the first pillars is community partners or industry partners, but somehow a
Right.
very direct correlation to that so that you can see what that looks like. Um,
Hmm, hmm,
Number 2 is you would just have to build in a ton of curiosity. Like that would be a major priority. Um,
okay.
and then the third priority would be the empowerment. I think through vision. So for me, like the vision of a leader is really important. Like I think your ruckus makers, like that vision is so important for them to get out there. Like the staff want that because it's empowering. They want to be a part of something bigger. And then our learners want to be a part of something bigger. So
Right.
the community partner, industry partner, curiosity, and then the empowerment of a great vision.
Awesome. And just a shout out to Brenda who left us a comment on LinkedIn. She said, "Love that, Ryan. You are so right. I use that as well in my 2 rules." So super cool. Thanks, Brenda, for the comment. And Ryan, we covered a lot of ground today from birding in the RV life and masterminding and PBL and your new book, PBL Simplified. Of everything we discussed today, and that listen to your mother, right? So of everything
That
we discussed today, what's the one thing you want Ruckus Maker to remember? And it's okay. You
was
don't have to go with the mom one. I give you
okay.
permission.
It felt like I should have gone with listen to your mom, but I'm gonna take that because maybe she's listening. But I
My
think it
mom
would be
watches
more.
these, so
Yeah, there you go. So listen to your mom. I would go with, even just like I love that Brenda just chimed in with that, like the collaboration
yep.
with other leaders. And I know the
Mm,
mastermind was a side conversation, but I can't express enough. Like the loneliness of leadership is real, and everybody
yep.
listening knows that and feels it in some way. And the mastermind opportunity, the collaboration within this community, um, is the way that you deal with that, if you will, and excel beyond that, because you
Mm,
have people that get you and that can push you, like so that you don't get complacent and that you have a place to really try out those big ideas before you go implement. I don't think that I could be behind that enough.
mm.